So before we go into the review, I've just got a couple of things, a bit of housekeeping to get over. Do you love merch? Because we all love merch, don't we? I mean, the point is, with the landfill sites, is they're not full enough. So if you want some funky dunky 5 games for Doomsday t-shirts, hoodies, and all of that sort of great stuff, go over to sirmeeple.com and buy it all. And then I can retire to an island where I don't have to think about the terrible pollution in the world. And secondly, as you know, the nominations are open for the Board Game Geek Golden Geek Awards. Now, I know I've got no chance of winning, but I would just like to be thought of. So unless you want to see a grown man roll around having a tantrum on the floor like a toddler, go to boardgamegeek.com, follow the link from the front page and vote for 5 games for Doomsday for the Golden Geek Best Podcast of the Year Award. You know you want to. From the kitchen of the cabin, it's the 5 games for Doomsday review. I have tremendous gaps in my knowledge, grand wind-whipped crevasses, ragged rent rifts that ably demonstrate to the world that I am in no way as intelligent as I wish I was. Also, I like to defer blame. I have one of those "the buck stops here" signs that Harry Truman had on his desk, and my life is a constant scramble to give it away. Now, you could say that my glaring lack of knowledge in several key and distressingly rudimentary areas could be attributed to, fecklessness and indolence. You could say that, but I have a far more insidious explanation, a devilishly disingenuous act of legerdemain that absolves me of all blame. I blame the government. It is clear to me that all of my misfortune, my dwindling bank account, my thickening waist, my drooping eyelids are all part of an insidious plot by John Major's 90s government to prevent me from reaching my obvious potential. The gaps in my knowledge are clearly a result of the English school curriculum of my youth, and the fact that many of the people I went to school with have gone on to be fabulously successful and lead happy lives has nothing to do with it. I was presented with a buck, and I wouldn't wish to be the cruel soul that arrested its forward motion, and so I've passed it on. It's an act of charity, really. One of these particularly glaring areas, along with, geography, maths, English, both literature and language, is history. Yes, I've tried to plug some of the gaps during my post-education autodidact years, but apart from Pavement's early albums and the origin of the word splat, I'm something of a virgin sheet with regards to history. This was made abundantly clear to me when I played Britannia from the Plastic Soldier Company. Britannia is a game that charts the history of Britain from the invasion of the Romans in the 43rd year of the Common Era up to the completion of the Doomsday Book in 1085. It's also a game that goes a long way to demonstrating how little I know about the shifting populations and the repeated hostilities that make up the fractious past of that misty little rock in the sea that I was born on. Here are just some of the things I learnt whilst playing the game. Some of the interior parts of Britain were ruled, at the beginning of the last millennium, by descendants of the Belgic peoples that were wiped out in mainland Europe by inveterate self-promoter and device for holding Roman knives, Julius Caesar. Over the tumultuous millennium depicted in the game, Britain was inundated by peoples of so many different ethnic makeups that any sense of being truly British or there being a quantifiable British racial purity is so far-fetched that anyone espousing this tripe is a living warning against the dangers of interbreeding. today's immigrants are far less violent than those of a bygone age. Britannia is a game of invasion and settlement, and a sobering reminder that anything we hold dear is incredibly transient. In Britannia, empires fade in a quarter of an hour, and a single human life is a zoetrope flicker. Players take charge of the fortunes of various tribes and political entities that will fight over the plucky little island that could over the course of the millennium. The entities will enter the stage and then be rudely ejected when another power wants to come in and enjoy the breakfasts. This is modelled by moving units across the board and resolving any battles that arise. And that is all a player does on their turn. Move units and fight. It's almost so easy as to be criminal. There are a few nuances like stacking limits and population increase, but none of that is overly complicated either. Britannia is the essence of elegant, and I was incredibly surprised and gratified by that. The true genius of Britannia is in its timing and in its numbers. Britannia is a game whose sole interest is on charting the history of the country as closely as possible, and it does this beautifully. There is no room for sweeping counterfactuals here. Factions enter when and where they should, and victory point allocations guide players into aping the history books. Firstly, new entrants hang around the periphery, making raids, biting little chunks out of the island until they come to stay, and then are ousted by the new upstart, the new glorious leader. Points are allocated for conquering and holding certain regions, and so only the most willful player will contradict the will of the points. Britannia tells the story of the land through mechanical prompting, and the story it tells is enthralling and profound. Britannia is great fun. The simple skill with which a story is told is exhilarating. From the visual realisation of the units engulfing the board to the brief cameos of names that I remember from school. Harold Hardrada and Offa briefly flickering onto the scene and then subliming into the pages of history. This is a game that takes the frayed flaxen strands of history and weaves them into a whole and colourful tapestry. This is a game that is highly educational, but not in a soul-destroying way. It teaches us, but it also entreats us to live the history at the tips of our fingers, and it's a story I'm dying to manipulate again. The only drawback in this new version, though, is its sign of modernisation, the plastic soldiers. Gone are the chits with the names of the tribes printed on them, to be replaced with plastic blobs that are impossible to distinguish from a distance. This results in constant reference to a plastic thing and the picture in the rulebook to make sure you're placing the correct plastic thing. It's a minor annoyance that makes setup take far longer than it should, but it's worth noting. Before I played the game, the thought of playing Britannia depressed me, but when I played it, I was enthralled. I didn't remember a bloody thing about the history, but that's fine, because when I want a full-colour history lesson, I can open the box of Britannia and conquer that misty little island all over again. Thank you for listening, and if you find this stuff valuable, you can subscribe, and if you find it even more valuable, you can support the show at patreon.com/5G4D.